It is the first area in Europe to be liberated from German occupation during the Second World War. In the summer of 1941, Josip Broz Tito's communist partisans free a large part of Yugoslav Serbia. They build the first socialist republic in Yugoslavia, which they baptized the Užice Republic. Yet quickly, this republic becomes the battleground for rival resistance groups and German revenge. I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II in real-time special episode about the Republic of Užice. Spartacus already talked about Yugoslav resistance in 1941 in another special, and how the two major resistance groups, the Chetniks and the Partisans, both fight the German occupiers, but are also occupied with their animosity for each other. The partisan method, which has been more successful so far, is actually not just one of convincing Yugoslavs of the communist partisan ideals. On the contrary, they actively provoke the German occupiers to force people to take a side. See, the standard retaliation by now is that the Germans kill 100 locals for every German soldier killed, and 50 locals for every wounded German. Now, the partisans know that exposing the Yugoslav population to German violence might draw people to their camp. So they attack German strongholds with little regard for the consequences for the local populace, with the main goal to recruit more followers among those wanting revenge. And many do end up joining the partisans for this exact reason. And while Tito's forces do some serious damage to the German war effort, destroying the Bar mining complex, robbing the German war effort of a month's worth of copper, the partisans' main goal goes far beyond that. They frame their resistance not just as anti-German, but as a communist revolution with the purpose of founding a socialist state in Yugoslavia. See, the partisans care less about the military benefits of resistance, but instead focus on the territories where their actions would have the greatest political advantage. The first of which is founded already in September 1941. The partisans declare the Republic of Užice as the first large area liberated from German control. Tito and his Yugoslav Communist Party, KPJ, set up their socialist republic with the town of Užice as its capital. As best they can, they set up a top-down administration, centrally regulating political, cultural, and social life. They do this according to the Leninist principle of democratic centralism, where the Yugoslav Politburo democratically reaches consensus about military or civic policy, which is then enforced through the layers of command. Disobedience is often dealt with by force, contributing to a fairly effective management structure for the communists. Former Yugoslav administrative bodies are now replaced by elected people's committees. Schools, dance halls, cinemas, and theaters are opened again, and a communist newspaper called Borba, Struggle, now publishes 3 editions each week. A postal service connects the communities in the Užice Republic, and people's courts decide over judicial matters. The territory totals somewhere between 15 and 20,000 square kilometers, or that's like between half and 2/3 of modern-day Belgium. The Republic, of course, becomes important to the partisans' war effort. A clandestine weapons factory located in the bank in Užice produces weapons for the partisans' army. Roughly 400 weapons a day are assembled there. Užice is more than a convenient capital for the communists, though, as the royal government left behind 56 million dinars, or the 1941 equivalent of 280,000 pounds, making running the place somewhat easier, like they don't need to take supplies from farmers without paying them. The rival Chetnik resistance fighters do have to resort to such practices, creating animosity in some of the communities they enter. But running a republic landlocked in hostile territory is not an easy task. The new republic, and partisans in general, often lack weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, and food. Living conditions can be harsh, threatening morale and loyalty, but because the partisans are focused on creating a political unity rather than gaining a military advantage over the Germans, Since creating a huge popular movement against the Germans would likely carry far more weight, a loyal and supportive population allows them to be much more mobile and give them more immediate access to supplies. Propaganda efforts specifically try to create a multi-ethnic base by targeting fascism and the internal royalists. The partisans appeal to the Serbs by advocating the restoration of Yugoslavia, while also pledging to defend the Macedonian, Croat, Montenegrin, and Slovene populations. So propaganda is not directed at Croats in general, but at the fascist Ustaše. Posing as the only alternative for nationalist fascism, they do gain quite a following. But even with internal support, the Užice Republic still faces a lot of resistance, especially as Tito and his partisans don't enjoy the support of the Allied forces, who, together with the Yugoslavian government in exile, are supporting Draža Mihailovic's Chetniks instead. As we explained in the special on Yugoslav resistance, the Chetniks and the partisans have a bit of a love-hate relationship going on in the summer and fall of 1941. And while the partisans are better organized, and now have their own republic, the communists still appeal to the Chetniks to ensure their survival. See, the British are dropping supplies to the Chetniks, not to the partisans. An agreement to trade supplies for the weapons produced in Užice is drawn up on October 27th. This plan never comes to fruition, though, as a few days later, hostilities between partisan and Chetnik forces break out. The exact circumstances of these events remains mysterious, as both the Chetniks and partisans claim that the proposed agreement was declined by the other party. Still, in September and October 1941, the two groups do live alongside each other, also in the Užice Republic. Mihailovic has his Chetnik headquarters set up in Ravna Gora, roughly 40 kilometers away from Užice itself. Tito is keen to incorporate the Serb Chetnik fighters into his own ranks, wanting to create a multi-ethnic force, and offers Mihailovic the command of all resistance forces in Yugoslavia. Mihailovic declines, not wanting to become a military puppet to the political power of the communists. That brings us back to the key difference between groups. See, the Chetniks aren't that happy with the partisan methods of antagonizing Germans. On the contrary, the Chetniks' main purpose is the biological survival of the Serbs, and they fear that provoking Germans might lead to the eradication of the Serbian people. So they are increasingly frustrated as Tito's partisans continue expanding the Užice Republic into their own territory, but also further into territory held by the Germans, including violent clashes with the German military. It's not just Mihailovic and his Chetnik Serbs who are watching the partisans expand. Adolf Hitler and the German authorities in Yugoslavia are also watching, and they are not pleased either. Naturally, Hitler isn't happy with this free communist enclave in the middle of his Yugoslavia, but also because the expansions are now threatening supply and communication routes to and from southeastern Europe. Though the Germans don't have a lot of room to withdraw troops from the Eastern Front, they managed to scramble some units together from elsewhere. One infantry regiment from Greece and a division from France arrive already in September. Other troops are drawn from Milan Nedic's troops. He stands at the head of the collaborationist Serbian Government of National Salvation. These forces launched their first counterinsurgency against the Yugoslav resistance on September 27th. It is called Operation Užice, aiming to reconquer the freed territory in western Serbia. This is the time that Wilhelm Keitel orders the killing of 100 Serbs for the loss of one German life. The battles are fierce, and the Germans retaliate against the local population when German losses occur. The Germans do hope to persuade Mihailovic's Chetniks to join their cause as well, though the Nazis also still suspect him to be one of Tito's anti-German allies. The Kraljevo massacre, a retaliation for German losses in a Chetnik partisan ambush, brings about the death of roughly 2,000 Serbs. In Kragujevac, another 2,500 are killed following a partisan raid in the second half of October. These are some of the events that strengthen Mihailovic's belief that his ideals are incompatible with the partisans, and he ultimately abandons his support for the uprising and instead joins the Germans in their fight against Tito's communist partisans on November 1st with an ineffective but very symbolic attack on the capital of the Užice Republic. At the same time, the Germans prepare to make an end to the Republic once and for all. The German offensive, consisting of over 4 infantry divisions with extensive air support, reaches its peak around the same time the Chetniks turn their backs on the partisans, even though the Germans also destroy the Chetnik base at Ravna Gora. By the end of November, the partisan headquarters at Užice, as well as most of the remaining territory, is back in German hands. The communist army retreats into southeastern Bosnia, controlled by the puppet state of Croatia. This marks the end of the Užice Republic, but creating larger, free socialist territories from which the partisans operate will remain their preferred method throughout the remainder of the war. But those stories are for another time. One interesting detail from this chapter of World War II is the aftermath regarding the Chetniks. They are now openly battling the partisans, in which they're collaborating with the Germans, though they are also sometimes resisting the Germans elsewhere. Let's just say it's complicated. The Allies clearly also don't fully grasp what's going on, as they give credit to the Chetnik Serbs for the successful anti-German resistance that resulted in the Užice Republic. The British government continues to recognize the Chetniks as the only legitimate resistance force in Yugoslavia. Mihailovich is now framed as an Allied war hero in the British press. Meanwhile, Tito's partisans are regarded as insignificant or even outcasts. A journalist writes that Tito is, in fact, not a person, but an acronym for an ineffective communist conspiracy, the Third International Terrorist Organization. It is complicated, and it will grow ever more complicated because it is just plain true: war creates strange bedfellows. As we mentioned, Tito's partisans are now retreating into the southern areas of Bosnia and to Herzegovina. These areas are controlled by the Croatian puppet state run by the Ustaše. To see more of how the Ustaše forged their state in blood, you can watch our War Against Humanity episode from April about that right here. And join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com to see ever more of this fantastic content. See you next time.